the Scottish Family Party, people get in touch with us quite regularly, telling us their stories about education, family life in Scotland, things relevant to our policies. I'm just going to share one of those stories with you now, which I just heard a couple of weeks ago. Just listen to this. It's about a girl called Helen in Scotland. When she was 9, she's autistic. When she was 9, one evening, she was upset. Her parents said to her, "What's wrong? What are you upset about?" She said, "Oh, we've been learning about LGBT things at school. I'm really worried. Am I going to be LGBT? I don't know." So parents had to reassure her, "Look, you're only 9. You don't need to worry about that sort of thing." That's LGBT inclusive education policy in action. Right, when she was a little bit older, maybe into her teens, she was reading a book once, a novel. The parents saw it. It looked a bit dark, the content. So they read it. And it was about a teenage girl who attempted suicide by taking an overdose of pills, kept attempting suicide. Each time she did, she had a sort of mystical experience meeting a supernatural friend. So the whole thing was sort of glamorized, romanticized, mysticized. So the parents went to see the head teacher. Head teacher said, "Oh, nothing to do with me really. I can see your concerns, but I don't choose what books go in the library. So it's not really my department. Nothing much I can really do about it." Right, let's get into the more serious things now. When Helen was 13, she reports that she was sexually assaulted on more than one occasion by a particular boy, Angus, who was age 16 at the time. And this took place in the presence of a few other pupils in the school as well. Not rape, but pretty well everything but very serious sexual assault. The school became aware of the incident. The school investigated, asked Helen for a statement, etc. And they contacted the parents and said, "There's been a bit of an incident. Could you come in and see us about it? In 2 weeks' time, we'll have a meeting." And the parents said, "Oh, can you tell us what it is in the meantime? I mean, it sounds, we're quite worried. Can you just tell us?" The school said, "No, nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about. Just come in 2 weeks' time and we can talk it over then." So, how about that then? What happened in the intervening 2 weeks? Well, Helen, very distressed, disturbed by these assaults, attempted suicide by taking an overdose of pills. Of course, the parents were unable to support her as they might otherwise have done because they didn't know what was going on. Helen hadn't divulged to the parents at that point what was happening. Right, the boy who had committed the sexual assault that Helen was alleging, he was contacting her by messages, online messages, encouraging us to commit suicide, saying to her, basically, "You've got to do a better job of it. Have you thought of trying this method? Why not? Maybe you need to take more pills." Those messages captured, available as evidence, but that's what he was doing. The school, it seemed, no action was taken against this boy. It was reported to the police. Again, no action taken there either. Right, moving on. Helen, 15. She began a romantic relationship with another boy. Let's call him Rob. And Rob's parents later informed Helen's parents that the two of them had started having sex together. And then, without any communication to Helen's parents, Rob's father took Helen to an NHS sexual health clinic to have a contraceptive implant put in her. And that took place. Right, Helen's parents only found out about what had been done to her daughter later. Helen reports that she felt pressurised into that, didn't necessarily fully understand it. Helen's GP told her parents that, in her opinion, there's no way Helen could have consented to that, given informed consent to that. But apparently at the clinic staff didn't make any efforts to assess Helen's capacity to consent. They didn't even check who the adult was who was with her. They didn't even check. They probably just assumed it was a parent. And there are also apparently reports of Rob's father doing the same thing with other girlfriends that his sons had in the past as well. So this implant is implanted. One of the side effects, low mood. This again resulted in Helen becoming depressed and volatile. Before that, she'd been pretty upbeat. It really had a big effect on her mental health. And suicide attempts followed. Serious suicide attempts, multiple. Mental health services were very slow. Support and treatments were often too brief, very inadequate. And on one occasion, Helen was admitted to hospital after a suicide attempt. And in the hospital, she was saying, as soon as I get out of this hospital, I am going to commit suicide. And the hospital said to her parents, okay, we're discharging her now, you need to take her home. And the parents said, we can't take her home. She's saying she's going to commit suicide immediately. What do you expect us to do? She needs to stay under your care for the time being. And the response from the hospital was, no, we're done. Over to you. You've got to take her home. And the story is ongoing from there. How about that then? Right, let's draw a few conclusions from this sorry tale. First of all, LGBT inclusive education, the policy of having LGBT content in teaching in every subject at every level of the curriculum from nursery onwards, is wrong. It's supported by every party in the Scottish Parliament, including the Conservative Party. We would overturn it. Number 2, the policy of not enforcing the age of consent leaves children vulnerable to sexual assault. The age of consent officially is 16, but everyone knows, including teenagers who are taught it at school, that actually the police won't do anything if you're 13 or over and the age difference is not too big. So this sexual assault, as far as the police are concerned, consent would do the trick for that. Consent could justify that. Strictly speaking, the law says consent can't justify that. We would have the strictly speaking interpretation of the law, and that would protect young people from this sort of incident, because then consent would be no defence. The failure of schools to keep parents informed of serious issues leaves parents unable to properly support and advise them. How many stories have I heard where, there's one case, remember, I think it was a 13-year-old girl. She'd had a mental health diagnosis, and the parents who live with her, care for her, support her day by day, didn't know what it was, because she decided she didn't want them to know. It's just completely wrong. So this cutting parents out of that sort of process needs to stop. And one of the parents put it very nicely, summing this case up. They said, when there's a big decision to be made, the state is quite happy to say to the parents, you keep out of this. Let's leave this to the professionals. We'll deal with that. Your son or daughter doesn't want you to know about what's going on. So, you're on the sidelines. Then when it comes to, right, who's going to look after this person day by day? Love them, support them, care for them, morning, afternoon and night. Well, the state's quite happy to hand them back to the parents for that bit, which is obviously completely wrong. I say we would change that philosophy. Schools routinely excuse bad behaviour, diffuse personal responsibility, and so bad characters, they try something on, they get away with it. So they try something else on, they get away with it. And they just keep doing worse and worse things, and basically nothing happens. And then it ends up with things like this happening. Basically, what's reported here was a sexual assault. We would end that culture in schools. There would be personal moral accountability. There would be punishment, and there would be stern and escalating action to deal with bad characters. And when this sort of incident happens, the school and the police, well, I feel they're both underreacted. Let's put it that way. Another common theme I hear, came up in this one as well, is head teachers saying, yeah, I appreciate your concerns. Yeah, I'm not much for it myself. But, what can I do? I just have to do what the government says, have to do what the council says. Okay, my teachers are doing that. I don't really like it, but they're just following the guidance. Yeah, I can quite, what they're saying is true. It's true. A lot of these wrong philosophies, wrong ideas, they are coming from the government, from the council, maybe teachers bringing them themselves. But for head teachers, it's not good enough. You've got to take a stand. I was just obeying orders, not interested. You've got to do something. If you're being pressed into doing something that you think's wrong, it's your job to push back against it or refuse to do it. Now, most head teachers are probably thinking, I couldn't possibly do that. I might lose my job. Yeah, lose your job for the sake of protecting children. You couldn't possibly do that, could you? What a ridiculous thing to suggest. Really? Are you in the right job? Right, next thing. School resources. I've heard so many stories of really ridiculous resources in school libraries, elsewhere. Anyone with any common sense and decency would look at them and think, no, that shouldn't be in the school library. Shouldn't be in a school at all. But it seems at the moment, it's like no one thinks that's their job. These resources will pass through the hands of one person, then another, and no one thinks it's their job to say, wait a minute, this is not right. We would make it so that it is people's job to do that. Now, how would that be done? That could be quite tricky. I mean, delegated to Education Scotland, I mean, they would have no clue whatsoever. But something needs to be done about that. We would look at steps that could be taken to have a common sense look at resources in schools. Under 16s shouldn't be able to consent to medical treatments without parental involvement. That would solve the problem in this case with a contraceptive implant. But in Scotland, you get girls going for abortions and all sorts, and the parents don't know. And it's just wrong. I remember one story, a deputy head teacher in Scotland said that she knew that a girl in her school had had an abortion, but the parents didn't know. So the parents were speaking to the deputy head teacher, and they were saying to her, "Oh, our daughter, she's really out of sorts. We don't know what's bothering her. She's not herself at all. We're really worried about her. What do you think?" And the deputy head teacher had to say, she couldn't say. She really wanted to say to them, look, this is the issue, but she was not allowed to in Scotland currently. Right, sexual health clinics operate with an ethos that is contrary to the values of many parents, and they see it as their role to protect children from parents, and they take this conspiratorial approach. Hey, don't worry, kids, we're on your side. We know your parents are probably not approving, but we're on your side. We're here to help you have a great sex life at age 13 or whatever. So we would change that. We would change the policy and guidelines and the ethos of those institutions. Mental health services are overwhelmed. That's a huge problem. Obviously, they need more resources. Ultimately, the solution to these things is not just to throw more and more money at youth mental health services. We've got to change the philosophy in education. We've got to support family life, etc. That's the long-term solution to the problem. But this idea of, sort of online, I was talking to another parent recently, that their daughter got involved in an online forum where the message was very strongly, she was thinking about changing gender, or what's changing gender. The message was, you need to cut your parents off. If they're not 100% behind you, you need to cut them off. And this philosophy that families are a bit dangerous and young people need protecting from their families, and if necessary, which it probably is, they need to cut their families off, because that's the only way you can protect and look after the children. And the people proposing that, they're not actually going to look after the children day by day. So that ethos, again, needs to be challenging at every opportunity. The next point, accommodation of suicide in our culture is dangerous. Children need to see suicide as tragic, unnecessary and wrong, not as brave, positive and romantic. So materials that are presenting that message certainly shouldn't be in schools, and the opposite message should be in schools. Let children hear about someone who maybe contemplated suicide or attempted suicide, wasn't successful, but then went on to live a happy, fulfilled life, and they're so glad that they were unsuccessful. That's the sort of story young people need to be hearing. And the last thing, you might be quite interested to hear this, encouraging suicide is illegal in England and Wales. So that schoolboy who was messaging a fellow pupil, urging them to commit suicide, he would have been committing a crime in England and Wales. In Scotland is not, because encouraging suicide is not a crime in Scotland. It's not illegal. Scottish Family Party policy is to make it so. So what needs to be done to protect children, to prevent this sort of heartbreak? It's not a bit of tinkering around the edges. It's a root and branch change of philosophy and ethos throughout the whole of education, NHS, the whole of society really. A radical new path needs to be trod, and only the Scottish Family Party can lead Scotland down it. So support us. Okay, thanks for watching.